What happens when an unsuspecting nephew becomes the unwitting victim of my DIY justice against an overreaching HOA? Sometimes the absurdity of rebellion comes with unexpected consequences. As I sipped my coffee, the bright red sports car gleamed in the morning sun like an unwelcome beacon of annoyance, proudly parked across my driveway. I should have felt grateful for its owner's apparent lack of parking acumen, but instead I was left contemplating my thwarted plans. Staring at the car was akin to projecting my annoyance into the void, silently seething at how casual that colorful hunk of metal was about my morning ritual. All I wanted was to back out, hit the local coffee shop, and pretend I was the kind of person who does weekend brunches. Instead, I felt more like a hapless protagonist trapped in a slapstick comedy. Oh joy, would I have to knock on Oblivion's door and ask the car's owner to move it along? Little did I know this would be the first act of a drawn-out tragedy filled with absurdity, entitlement, and my ever-growing collection of clever responses to HOA overreach. After 3 visits from temporary parking fools, all violating the one sacred space I had in this neighborhood, I decided the HOA bylaws were my next stop. They are supposed to be a guiding light, but reading through that tortuous document felt less like navigating my rights and more like deciphering an ancient script. Between the clauses about ornamental garden gnomes and the regulations surrounding mailbox design, there they were, nestled like a sweet morsel in a bitter dessert. My rights. I blinked at my discovery. Yes, I had the right to keep my driveway clear. The revelation hit me like a high-octane energy drink. I could take action. Fueled with righteous indignation, I envisioned a solution so glorious it shimmered in my mind. A retractable spike strip. Just imagine the look on Karen's face when her darling little HOA ruled were matched with a dose of irony sharper than a snake's tooth. I giggled to myself, picturing parking violations turning into something straight out of a heist movie. Of course, my vision of a smooth transition to my glorious spike strip was interrupted by the inevitable meddling of Karen Blythe, HOA president, an all-around dreadful person. I steeled myself for the encounter with my local version of the Wicked Witch of the West. Sporting a perfectly ironed blazer and her signature frown, she opened the door to her pristine home as I approached, her posture rigid with the authority she craved. "Jake," she said, her nose angled like a hawk examining its prey. "What do you want?" I tried to keep my face neutral as I explained the need for clarity on the driveway issue, including the repeated violations that haunted my mornings. Her gaze narrowed, transforming my life choice into another exercise of power for her. "You know the regulations, Jake," she clipped. "We do need parking rules to maintain neighborhood aesthetics." "Really, Karen?" I wanted to yell, as if a muddled sense of aesthetics warranted blocking someone's driveway for 5 hours straight. After our little tete-a-tete, I returned home ready to whip my inner engineer into shape. After rummaging through my garage, I materialized a few garage-appropriate tools and entered into the fascinating realm of DIY engineering. Imagine me, Jake Thompson, a tech-savvy software developer with zero experience in hardware but a vivid imagination, hunched over his laptop crafting a blueprint for a retractable spike strip. And thus began my masterclass in questionable life choices. I envisioned my dream in 3D renderings, a glorious spike strip that would inadvertently turn my driveway into a forbidden zone for parking miscreants. I stocked up on parts from the local hardware store, chuckling at the bewilderment of clerks as they rang up my eccentric collection of parts. "Just a personal project," I'd smile as they stared at my hard-earned assortment of sharp precision. Their confusion just added fuel to my pet project. The installation day arrived, and I couldn't help but feel like a mad scientist ready to unleash chaos. Armed with sparks from the deep recesses of my imagination and a penchant for revenge, I set to work. The sun shone bright, casting whimsical shadows as I toiled through the morning, puzzling together odds and ends like a cheap mechanic. By the time I finished, I couldn't help but step back in awe at my creation. It was magnificent. The retractable spike strip gleamed like a treasure resting in the sunlight, a testament to my efforts and sheer stubbornness. The neighborhood was in for a surprise. I I could practically hear the triumphant music playing in the background. Word got around like wildfire, and even Eddie Blythe, the chill college kid who actually had a personality buried beneath his aunt's authoritarian shadow, expressed interest. "Hey, Uncle Jake," he laughed, looking impressed for just a moment. "Is this your version of overcompensation? You should apply for a patent." I chuckled, already envisioning the magnus opus of driveway protection. Before the day was over, curiosity brought Eddie out repeatedly, laughing and adding his own ridiculous suggestions. "How about a sign, 'Beware of spikes'? No one will take it seriously," he jeered. But as fun as it was to have him shove my ideas into absurdity, deep down, I knew this was about much more than protecting my driveway. This was about reclaiming a little pocket of personal sovereignty, and I was on the verge of turning my entire ordeal into an epic saga of spiky justice. However, I had no clue how soon my well-laid plans would unfold, and with it, the unexpected hilarity of karma coming around to serve a show-stopping moment. What could possibly go wrong with a spike strip hidden away from view, sitting politely and awaiting vehicle mischief? I could hardly wait to find out. The day of my triumphant mini-rebellion dawned bright and clear, perfectly contrasting the storm brewing within the confines of my heart. I could sense it. The anticipation layered beneath my skin like the thrill of standing before a crowd as the curtain rises. While my over-engineered contraption lay ready to defend my driveway with a precision only a software developer could dream up, I paced back and forth like an actor on stage before the big performance. What if nobody parked there today? But wait. I stopped mid-stride, realizing I required a little patience. Karen's nephew, Eddie, would be visiting soon. His presence was practically a guarantee for chaotic parking antics, and I couldn't wait to see how satisfying the result of my petty genius would be. The thought alone prompted an evil grin to creep across my face. As fate would have it, just as the sun hit its noon peak, I heard a rumble followed by unmistakable sounds of a brash vehicle making its way down the street. Sure enough, the gleaming red sports car reappeared, hot on the heels of an equally flashy motorcycle. "Oh, what a joy!" I muttered sarcastically, peering through the curtain and putting on my best expression of indifference. Eddie Blythe, with his untamed hair flapping in the breeze, mounted the motorcycle like a rebel ready to storm a castle, blissfully unaware of any potential consequences, specifically, my little deadly secret hiding just below his momentum. I could hardly contain my glee, while imagining him enthusiastically telling me how the ride went, completely oblivious to the spike strip lurking in wait. The motorcycle cruised to a halt, and I braced myself for the best part of the show, Eddie dismounting with swagger and chutzpah, boasting about how fantastic life was, while casually contemplating the best spot to park. As he leaned against the nearest post and squinted at his phone, I couldn't help but contemplate the universe's design. Here was the man poised to become a vital character in my twisted tale. Sure enough, just as I was beginning to gather the courage to join the fray, a wide grin broke across Eddie's face, and with a nonchalant air, he pushed the motorcycle right onto my driveway, facing the sun. "Right there's just perfect," he cheered, as I barely managed to stifle a snort. Maybe Eddie's youthful exuberance was entertaining to me because I was on the verge of enlightenment. It also felt oddly delightful to contain the growing burst of laughter at his imminent discovery. From my perch inside, it almost felt as if I were monitoring a live action play, where he was the unwitting leading man stepping onto a stage I had cobbled together. With every wiggly finger of anticipation, I watched as he began to bend down, unaware of the surprise waiting beneath his motorcycle wheels. And then it happened. In a flash, a moment so quick it felt surreal, Eddie leaned forward and poof! The spike strip sprung to life, revealing its pointy majesty. My heart raced, and I leaned forward, biting my lip in nervous excitement as reality slapped him like cold water. The spike strip did its job with precision, dramatically shedding the affectation of subtlety. With one brief scream muffled by his shock, Eddie's motorcycle tires met the spikes like unwitting victims. I burst into raucous laughter, not just from the absurdity of the moment, but from the sweet, sweet taste of karma served hot and at the expense of a perpetually carefree college kid. I couldn't believe what had just unfolded. A remarkable feat of irony, and I practically felt victorious without lifting a finger. The laughter echoed off the walls of my mind. Thankfully concealed a mere 5 yards away, I proudly witnessed the rush of chaos that would surely follow. Moments later, Karen herself stormed down the street, wild-eyed and half-convinced my driveway was still off limits. Despite her son's current plight, her nephew was on the ground, surrounded by irate spikes and a handful of bewildered neighbors who had popped their heads out from behind closed doors. I could almost hear the collective gasp as Karen took in the chaotic scene, her tightened, coiled hair bouncing as she marched toward her demolished nephew. "What have you done, Eddie?" she screeched, exuding the quintessential mix of parental panic and unjustified outrage. Meanwhile, I remained a shadowy figure, fighting off hysterical fits of laughter, thankful my window was sneaky enough to keep my perpetrated mission a secret. Just imagine the headlines. OA president's nephew gets spiked while parking, local hero revealed. In the grand spectacle of life, watching Karen squabble and fuss over Eddie's mishap confirmed my suspicions about the absurdity of their entitlement. The drama unfolded like a soap opera comedy instead of my anticipated showdown, growing into a medley of incredulity that left everyone speechless. Eddie even trying to muster the words to explain his predicament as he hopped around, balancing on the other wheel while Karen frantically waved for help. Meanwhile, I dug my phone out, ready to capture this moment of magnificent righteousness. "Did you forget to read the fine print, Eddie?" I yelled, unable to help myself, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Backing up my protest with a smug expression as Karen fumed, I felt somewhat invincible at that moment. There was beauty in my victorious scheme, and it felt deliciously satisfying as the comical retaliation of my little driveway might just linger long after the dust settled. Just as I settled into my mood of triumph, what unexpected twist might come next in this absurd HOA saga? As I stood there, finally allowing the joy of my master plot to sink in, I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. The sight of Eddie, now a hapless victim to my petty revenge plan, was worth every hour I spent designing the spike strip. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that my little scheme would yield such instant and aesthetic satisfaction. Karen's frantic gestures reached an apex of melodramatic panic, arms flailing, as if she were conducting a symphony of frustration. I tucked my smile behind my coffee cup, savoring the blend of caffeine and comedic chaos, my heart racing from the sheer delight of watching my enemy squirm. Even the bemused neighbors, who had emerged like intrigued wildlife from their dwellings, seemed to have formed an audience for this spontaneous comedic play, with their expressions ranging from horror to outright glee. "Eddie, why didn't you check?" Karen exclaimed, her voice dripping with disbelief, her perfectly coiffed hair bobbing as if it were a separate character within the drama. "You can't just park wherever you want. This is an HOA community." To which Eddie, bless his blissfully clueless heart, could only manage to hop around like an oversized rubber chicken, looking as if he'd misplaced a limb along with his dignity. The scene was rich with comic irony. Here was the typical college kid, fresh out of his carefree youth, being schooled in the ways of suburban parking regulations by his own aunt, one who practically believed that our HOA existed to enforce the unstated law of no fun allowed. As Karen frantically dialed for help, I interjected with my most innocent tone, "Can I offer a tire repair discount, Karen? I hear the spikes work wonders." My words were met with a dagger's glare, but oh, how the sparks flew! The tableau held my attention for what seemed like an age. Eddie's helpless bouncing and Karen's hyperventilating, mixed with bursts of neighborly laughter, crafting a delightful backdrop that would stick with me long after this moment passed. Just as the absurdity peaked, a vintage green pickup rumbled into view. I recognized it immediately. Frank, the self-appointed handyman of the neighborhood, whose enthusiastic knack for machinery extended into days of a county fair's skill set. He'd been forever on call for anything ranging from deep-sixed garden hoses to unwelcome tree branches hovering menacingly over rooftops. "What's this ruckus about?" Frank called, pulling a toolbox that could rival a clown car from the bed of his truck. As if summoned by fate, he hopped out with gleaming hope in his eyes, ready to face whatever crisis awaited him. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Frank, get over here! Eddie's met the spike strip!" Karen screeched, her voice a mix of horror and authority that left no question who was in charge. Frank eyed the situation, and despite his best intentions, the corners of his lips quirked in what I swore was a fighting smile. "I thought those things were just urban legends," he chuckled, trying to stifle his amusement. Eddie gave a half-hearted wave, his eyes wide and bewildered as he scrubbed a hand over his face, likely wondering how his parking misadventure had turned into a family production, starring his tyrant aunt and the local handyman. Meanwhile, I reveled in my front row seat, a master puppeteer observing the upheaval caused by my obliviously clever handiwork. All I needed was some popcorn. Karen turned to her loyal constituents. "We need to remove this hazard immediately. It's a violation of our HOA code." I felt a surge of delight as I leaned back, fingers pressed against my lips to contain my delight. Little did she know that this haphazard predicament was a byproduct of her relentless strictness, a just universe balancing itself by making her nephew the poster boy of tire well-being. Frank began to unspool the story, asking Eddie if he'd at least learned a lesson in parking etiquette. "Next time, perhaps avoid high-speed tire shredders on driveways," he quipped, still barely managing to keep a straight face. Eddie attempted to give a sheepish smile, the wheels of learning clearly beginning to turn in his mind. Somewhere in the depths of his thoughts, an awareness emerged that real life wasn't just about curvy asphalt and reckless abandon. As chaos simmered down and Eddie finally swung himself free from his two-wheeled nightmare, an unforeseen turn of events began to unfold. The onlookers, the bemused neighbors who'd made this their evening entertainment, broke into a chorus of laughter, with the neighborhood kids even taking bets on whether Eddie would become the new poster child for how not to park. Muffled giggles floated through the air, and I felt like the director of a real-life comedy, one that involved heartening camaraderie, shared lunacy, and the ever-expanding beauty of watching a community bond over unfortunate circumstances. It would undoubtedly make for great gossip at the next HOA meeting, where I would momentarily remain the shadowy hero, the tensions of petty revenge simmering just beneath the surface, yet strangely invigorating our community spirit. As the last traces of commotion began to settle, with Eddie sheepishly dialing a towing service, I leaned back in my chair, wondering about the next HOA confrontation. The experience had not only amused me, but invigorated my spirit for the small rebellions hiding in the ordinary. Would Karen retaliate? Would I need to expand my defenses? Could escalation mean more elaborate traps? Such thrilling possibilities lingered in the air, accompanied by an undercurrent of rebellious joy that suggested my work was far from over. With every spike I had laid, I felt emboldened, as though I could conjure more mischief from the depths of my slightly twisted imagination. Where would this amusing feud with the HOA take me next? Perhaps a delightful escalation was already brewing. As the dust settled, and Eddie's phone call to the towing service resonated through the eager bystanders, I basked in the glow of my victorious yet absurd coup d'etat against our HOA president. I could hardly believe how one whimsical idea had spiraled into an evening of rich mischief, truly. Who would have thought a tire shredder could serve not just as a deterrent for parking rules, but as a community bonding experience? A wave of contentment washed over me as I eyed my neighbors' amused expressions and barely concealed giggles. This was the unplanned social event of the season. It was almost too good to be true. Not only had I neutralized Karen's frowning influence with a slapstick display of driveway defense, but I'd also become the neighborhood's reluctant hero. This will make the top 10 neighborhood stories for sure, I thought, resisting the urge to pat myself on the back. By now, the laughter ricocheted through the air with an infectious energy that caught even the previously unimpressed. Mrs. Porter from 2 doors down, a usually stoic individual known for her authoritative stance on pet waste, burst into a fit of giggles that drew the attention of everyone within earshot, a rare event indeed. "Oh, Karen, maybe this is your wake-up call to rethink your parking directives," she shouted, delighting in her own wickedness. Each chuckle and half snort reminded me that my little project had inadvertently united us, turning a mundane evening into an uproarious soiree dedicated to the pitfalls of excessive regulation. Figures of authority had become figures of folly, leaving in their wake a sense of camaraderie I had only ever dreamt existed in sitcoms. Just when I thought the evening couldn't become any more delightful, Karen, with genuine fire in her eyes, turned her fuming presence toward me. "Jake Thompson, what on earth prompted such an absurd solution? Spikes on my nephew's driveway." It was a chorus of the exasperated villain, so typical of her character, and of course, just the type of melodrama I had hoped for. "Karen, I thought it was an innovative approach to driveways being treated like public parking lots," I replied with faux sincerity, waving my arms as if orchestrating a great symphony of naughty ideas. "I believe it showcases a creative spin on what we all know. You're just trying to protect the sanctity of our community, right?" The sassy tone of my voice was not lost on the crowd, and as the laughter swelled anew, I knew I had struck comedic gold. Then, in a twist of fate that I, the architect of chaos, could hardly predict, Eddie, who had finally managed to pry himself away from the wreckage of his dignity, decided to gallop up to my side. "You know, Jake, I was totally going to grab a pizza after class, but thanks to this little escapade, I guess I'll be spending my night dealing with the tow truck instead." His tone carried with it a wry humor, a newfound understanding bonding us in the wake of this hilariously disastrous parking escapade. "And just so you know," he added, leaning closer, "I'm not going to be the one who takes the blame for this when my mom finds out." It was a perfect dose of levity among the drama, making me realize that not all of Karen's strictness got passed down genetically. At that moment, it felt like Eddie and I were in on a secret, a shared understanding between two unsuspecting rebels connected by the mayhem that was now our collective life. Regaining her composure, Karen decided she wasn't finished with her rant. No, not even close. "I'll be launching a formal complaint," she huffed, hands firmly planted on her hips. "This isn't over, you know." I couldn't help but stifle a snicker. Her reaction was like rewatching the classic scenes of a badly scripted drama, one I had somehow unwittingly cast myself in. "Oh, please do, I'll be waiting for my summons," I mused, my smirk bubbling under the surface. "But let's make sure we schedule it during backyard barbecue season. I wouldn't want to miss our community bonding time." The surrounding crowd erupted in laughter, and I couldn't help but feel there was a latent power in my pettiness. Maybe the universe had a flair for irony after all. As the dramatic scene continued unfolding, I noticed Frank, that sarcastic handyman whose character fit right in with our merry band of misfits. He leaned closer and whispered, "You might want to think about your next strategic move, friend. Karen is probably plotting her counterattack as we speak." His conspiratorial tone resonated with both urgency and elation, a man after my own heart. "But if you need a hand with some newfangled ideas, I'm your guy." Frank winked, tapping his plethora of tools that hung gleamingly from his belt. Now I was entirely intrigued. I could practically sense the wheels turning in my head. The next stage of my HOA drama had to build upon this momentum. I had skirmished with the titan of local governance, and I knew that letting the heat die down wouldn't suffice. And just like that, an entire history of shenanigans began to unfold before me as I plotted our side of the narrative. What if, I began slowly, leaning into Frank's eager expectations, what if we get a bunch of these little surprises for all her future headaches? You know, like a reverse HOA Black Ops unit, the HOA of sons with spikes. The thought made me chuckle, while my newfound allies around me joined in, reimagining themselves as the stealthy but rebellious guardians of suburban fun. Let's show Karen that she's not the only one with creativity in this neighborhood. A light bulb buzzed to life in my imagination, illuminating an extraordinary path towards the next HOA meeting, one loaded with spy-inspired measures, laughter, and pranks. Where was this raucous river of reinvention leading us next? Only time would tell. With a newfound sense of mischief, the meeting began to wrap up, and the community buzzed with excitement about my bold impromptu performance. The notion of a reverse HOA Black Ops unit danced in my mind like a cartoon light bulb. It was official. I was not just a disgruntled homeowner. I was now the leader of a modern-day rebellion against the tyranny of Karen Blythe. The energy in the room felt electric, and I could practically hear the gears of creativity grinding as we collectively envisioned the hilariously misguided plans we could hatch to win our little war. As I surveyed my fellow homeowners, I realized I was no longer standing alone. I was surrounded by comrades in absurdity. Okay, picture this, I proposed, lowering my voice dramatically. Instead of just spikes, what if we set up some inflatable flamingos for the next HOA meeting? I mean, nothing says welcome to our realm of fun like gaudy pink birds, right? The crowd erupted in laughter, and even Karen had lost some of her indignant heat, if only for a fleeting moment. I could see Eddie grinning from ear to ear, perfectly embodying the spirit of rebellion. And let's just say these inflatable beacons could also serve as construction markers for a pop-up park right on Karen's meticulously manicured lawn, for community bonding. Frank, always one to embrace cows, piped up. Why stop there? We could disguise the flamingos as community safety mascots. Every neighborhood has its own quirky characters, and flamingos are so boringly common that they'd raise no suspicion. The thought of staging a flamingo-themed takeover made my heart race. The boundless laughs from the crowd reassured me. This was not just about mishaps at the driveway. This was about a shared defiance against stuffy governance, an uprising fueled by humor and camaraderie. I clapped my hands together, rallying my troops for what was sure to be a long-term rebellion. All right, you're in. We'll transform this HOA into a vibrant fiesta of creativity. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning, or perhaps I should say planning with pizzazz. Our covert gatherings transformed from gossip sessions into earnest brainstorming marathons. The Committee of Renegade Homeowners was born. I could already envision our first fundraising event, a rebel BBQ in my backyard, one filled with flamingo decor and maybe even some overly exaggerated eye-rolling neighbor humor. Each member, from Beer Belly Bob to the perpetually knitting Ms. Porter, joined eagerly under my vision. Even Karen's disapproving glances became the fuel for our creativity, turning drudgery into unrivaled hilarity. One afternoon, while piecing together patterns for our next scheme, I received an unexpected visit from Eddie. He strolled into my living room, sporting an oversized flamingo costume, an outfit both absurd and adorably ridiculous. I thought this could be the perfect mascot for our BBQ, and I figured if I have to wear it, it should be festive. He laughed, adjusting the quirky headpiece. I couldn't contain my laughter at the thought of Eddie prancing around my yard like some sort of rebellious lawn ornament. We rallied together, not just as annoyed neighbors, but as friends and conspirators in a joyful struggle against Karen's oppressive reign. As the day approached for our first ever Rebel BBQ, excitement buzzed like static in the air. I made sure every nook and cranny of my backyard was donned with inflatable flamingos, matchingly decorated paper plates, and, of course, the homemade deviled eggs that had become an unspoken neighborhood delicacy. Everything felt perfect until the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of our esteemed enemy, Karen, in her usual blazers and discontented scowl. My heart raced. Surely she'd come to halt our carnival of defiance. For a brief moment, I debated euphoric escape, but instead I decided to greet her with the enthusiasm of a welcoming committee president. Karen, so delighted you could join our little soiree. Care for some deviled eggs? To my surprise, the tension eased slightly as she reluctantly accepted a plate from a stunned Eddie. Her eyes darted around the festively chaotic yard. Are you serious right now, Jake? Flamingos? She deadpanned, hands on her hips again. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Oh, Karen, think of these as our collective protest to the asterisk of regulations you've imposed on us all. We've yet to see the current parking lot trend embraced with such style. The crowd erupted with cheers, effectively drowning out any remaining resistance from our HOA's prominent president. Perhaps wild whimsy had finally claimed its rightful territory in the heart of our community, all thanks to a certain tire shredder surprise. As the evening wore on, the laughter blended with the smell of charred burgers, igniting newfound hope even in Karen's scowling heart. I could tell she wanted to launch complaints, but found herself caught in the whirlwind of genuine neighborhood camaraderie. Who could resist the absurdity of a flamingo takeover, or the captivating aroma of fire-grilled angst? Only time would tell how the balance of power would shift in our little HOA. But one thing was crystal clear. We were about to rewrite the neighborhood manual on hilarity, together. Would this whimsical stand-up to HOA tyranny pave the way for new traditions? Only the future could unfold that hilarious story. As the Rebel BBQ kicked into high gear, I watched in silent amusement as Karen's frown slowly melted into an almost imperceptible smirk. The laughter echoed through my backyard, mingling with the sizzle of burgers and the whirring of a blender whipping up smoothies. Even the offending flamingos started to sway slightly in the summer breeze, casting long shadows across our lawn party, as if cheering us on in this sprawling revolution against the stifling order of our HOA. I couldn't believe it was all happening. Here we were, a congregation of rule-bending misfits, basking in the glow of petty defiance, with inflatable lawn ornaments sprinkled throughout. Who knew that fighting back against the tyranny of modified parking lot ordinances could be this much fun? Then came the moment I had envisioned, the one that would send a ripple through our community. Eddie, still rocking the ridiculous flamingo outfit, decided it was time for an impromptu dance-off contest. With nothing more than sheer enthusiasm and a spark of rebellion, he started busting moves in the middle of our yard, arms flapping and feet shuffling like a person possessed by holiday spirit. "Let's see the tribe of HOA warriors show us what they've got," he declared amid fits of laughter. In my mind, I could already hear Karen's iconic disapproval shifting ever so slightly with the music. Like moths drawn to a flame, neighbors began to gather around, their faces brightening as they clapped to the beat. Yes, this was the movement we'd craved, the birth of the neighborhood's first ever flamingo dance party. Things escalated quickly when, emboldened by the merriment, Frank decided to whip out his ukulele. "All right, folks. Let's give Karen some HOA folk songs to really think about," he chimed in, swinging his instrument like it was the most valuable weapon in our rebellion arsenal. Laughter surged as he strummed out a comedic ballad about HOA legislation gone awry, perfectly illustrating the absurdity of Karen's obsession. The lyrics contained such golden nuggets as, "No parking on Thursdays, or you'll face fines galore. If your grass isn't glorious green, they'll knock on your door." It was a real crowd pleaser, and before I knew it, not only did we have a dance-off on our hands, but we were also launching into full-blown neighborhood karaoke. Each word became synonymous with freedom. Every note and dance move expressed our shared frustrations one melody at a time. Yet, just when we thought nothing could spoil the jubilation, an ominous shadow loomed. Karen's stoic demeanor momentarily dropped from view, replaced by wide eyes and the urgency of reprimand as she stood clutching her plate of deviled eggs. "Do you all not realize we're breaking HOA regulations right now?" she squeaked in a melodramatic tone that only made everyone chuckle harder. I couldn't contain my laughter. It was like she had taken our party banner and raised it herself. "Oh, come on, Karen. Just look around. This could be your chance to embrace fun. Don't you remember your youthful days of rebellion? I mean, you've got to admit there's something liberating in a flamingo costume." The gentler side of her that had surfaced when she accepted that plate of snacks was surfacing again, and I couldn't help but leverage it. My bold repartee hung thick in the air, waiting for a reaction. To everyone's collective disbelief, Karen shifted her weight ever so slightly as her mouth opened to speak. "I suppose a little merriment might not hurt," she said, her voice holding fake authority but faltering at the edges. And just like that, the room fell silent as we collectively held our breath, wondering if the unthinkable would happen. Would Karen, the dreaded enforcer of regulations, plunge into the depths of our joyous rebellion? I dared to dream about a future where she'd represent the HOA with a flamingo mascot crown rather than the scowl she normally wore. In a moment that felt both painfully hysterical and outrageously entertaining, a neighbor shouted out, "Karen, show us your moves." In a bizarre turn of events that could only be likened to a social experiment gone gloriously right, Karen's frown finally cracked with laughter. Before I knew it, she was attempting a playful dance, albeit in a very stiff manner, shuffling her feet awkwardly like a cardboard cutout coming to life. The crowd erupted in raucous applause. The stern division between HOA president and regular folks melted away a little further with each shaky step she took. As she spun around, the humor broke down the barriers of patronizing authority, and our rebellious dance party transformed into a community-wide egalitarian celebration. A part of me wondered whether this was what change felt like. It was intoxicating. As dusk settled into a gorgeous twilight, we all sang, danced, and feasted, while Karen begrudgingly relented to join in the chaos. It felt like we had legitimately launched a revolution, right then and there, one that didn't just reclaim my driveway but opened the gates for true community spirit. In that moment, I relished the thought of Karen returning to her regime, possibly pondering her new flamingo-inspired visions for neighborly fun. Sure, we may have turned a single BBQ into spontaneous circus antics, but the true victory was establishing that humor could dismantle her suffocating policies one silly dance at a time. The turning point arrived not only in laughter or defiance, but in knowing we could be ridiculous and compassionate all at once. As I poured my last drink and leaned back to soak in the joyful chaos I had sparked, I realized our small act of rebellion had blossomed into far more. This was about uprooting entitlement with creativity while reminding ourselves that sometimes all it takes to challenge authority is a little absurdity, and perhaps a flamboyant parade of inflatable flamingos. After all, if we could turn a mere BBQ into a celebration of unity and resistance, who knows what else could be accomplished? Wasn't it high time that rulebooks were updated to reflect our newfound charm? Leaving behind yesterday's HOA frustrations, we had made our neighborhood a playground, quite literally, of laughter, shade, and ridiculous whimsy.